I taped yesterday's bubble last week before Wayne Swan announced that the AOFM will enter the residential mortgage-backed securities market and buy $4 billion worth of new securities. It should not surprise any viewer that I disagree fundamentally with this, because it is just further government interference in what is supposed to be a free market. And that's on top of the following existing market distortions: the first homeowners grant, the property investor tax rates, and the other federal government initiatives to pump our money into the banks via the RBA and the Future Fund. And then we have the state government initiatives of tinkering with stamp duties in an attempt to jumpstart the now correcting housing markets. Instead of indicating a willingness to end the distortions so that the free market will produce a fair price for a home, all we are getting is more and more distortions. And the few plans that the feds have come up with that are on the right track, such as the affordable rental scheme, they refuse to fast track, presumably because they're bowing to pressure from vested interests. So honestly, and in complete sincerity, how can we trust these guys to do the right thing by all Australians? Seriously, state and federal politicians have a great deal of work to do in housing policy to win back the trust of the electorate. This latest plan to pump $4 billion of taxpayer funds into the RMBS market is clearly in response to intense lobbying from the non-bank mortgage lenders, because the banks alone have enjoyed the benefits of all of the other interferences. With it looking more and more likely that the banks will not pass on any near-term cuts in the RBA cash rate, the government is playing the non-banks off against the big banks. Of course, the big banks securitise loans as well, so the $4 billion pot could also be used as a further bribe to the banks to pass on interest rate cuts. But let's stand back for a second and think about the costs and effects. Well, first and foremost, even though these will be new securities based on new purchases of houses, they will still be for the purchase of overpriced assets. Now, these are supposed to be AAA rated securities, but the fact is that the same rated securities have failed in the US. The only difference between the US bailout and this Australian bailout is that the government is buying in before the securities have gone toxic, which they almost certainly will. And this raises the biggest problem. The government will have even more political capital vested in high house prices. And for the first time, taxpayers as a whole will also have a vested interest in high house prices, lest our investment in the securities will be worth nothing. The most troubling part of all of this is that I don't think that this is the end of it. $4 billion is small bickies, but there is over $70 billion of outstanding Australian RMBS. Moreover, the government has been actively encouraging the banks to self-securitise previously unsecuritized mortgages, to use them in RBA repo agreements. So there is an absolute ton of this stuff out there, and my concern is that we taxpayers are, before long, going to own a very large chunk of it, just like in the US. And it is exactly the same game here as there. It's the political and business elites raking it in during the boom times from the average guy on the street, making millionaire factories and going into massive salaries, and then when the jig is up, as it always was going to be, suddenly the only possible way out is for the same man on the street to hold the can. And they'll promise that in return the government will go back and strengthen the system once the crisis is past. But they won't, and we'll go through the same cycle again and again. I say let the bastards that ripped all of the money out of the system hold the can. And finally, to the spruikers out there thinking that all of this political interference will be enough to prevent house prices from falling, think again. Australian house prices are simply way too high, and the longer governments deny this reality, the longer we will suffer the consequences of the bursting of this once-in-a-lifetime bubble. Thank you. www.geocities.com/homesforaussies. Standing up for affordable housing for all Australians. Written and spoken by Dr. Brett Edgerton, founder of Homes for Aussies.